On today's show, we'll be joined by none other than the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor Ben DuBose, as we discuss expectations and predictions for Houston Rockets Summer League. We'll also take a look at some of the speculation around the latest Kevin Durant Nets saga, how that plays out, and how the Houston Rockets could potentially get involved as a third team trade partner. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin. The show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. As always, we appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where the comments help us tremendously. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Remember, for the house, for the team, for the algorithm. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Arcade 1Up. Locked On Rockets is partnering with Arcade 1Up to give away 3 free NBA Jam Shack Edition machines. That's right. These are the guys known for making incredible retro arcade games like Pac-Man, Golden Tee, and more. Enter to win on arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade1up.com/lockedon for a chance to win one. Joining us now is, of course, the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor Ben DuBose. You can follow on Twitter at Ben DuBose. Ben, it's been a minute since we've had you on the program, and we've gone through a draft night. The Houston Rockets surprisingly walking away with Jabari Smith Jr. at the 3rd overall selection. We got Summer League right around the corner, just 2 days away, less than 48 hours from watching the Rockets play Summer League basketball. We're going to talk a little bit about Summer League expectations, both for the fresh-faced, draftees that just became Houston Rockets, as well as the grizzled veterans returning for their second round of Summer League with this Houston Rockets team. Let's start with the guys that everybody's really excited about, right? The 3 rookies, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, TyTy Washington. Let's start with just Jabari. What on the surface, what are your expectations for Jabari? What are you hoping to see out of him in Summer League?
I think the biggest thing is on the defensive end. I think it's going to be very different for Rockets fans going into this Summer League than last year, just because the style of play, obviously a year ago, your offense was going to run through Jalen Green when he was out there. That's not really the way it's going to work with Jabari, and you've talked about the reasons why in the last 2 weeks. He's much more of a complementary piece, now a really, really good one, but he's not someone, at least at this stage, that you're truly going to run your offense through every single possession in terms of asking him to create off the dribble. You're probably going to see a lot more of that, at least from the starting backcourt. It looks like after the peak they gave us at Toyota Center today, it looks like Daishen Nix and Josh Christopher are probably going to be the ones with TyTy Washington backing up Daishen Nix in the backcourt. But those guys are going to be, as your backcourt, the primary facilitators, and then some combination of obviously Jabari, Tari, Usman Garuba, those types of players in the front court. But I think with Jabari, the biggest thing I want to see is the defensive end. The highlight that really jumped out to me when AT&T Sportsnet Southwest posted the package today, and I called attention to it immediately, was that switch when I forgot who set the screen, but Jabari got isolated on TyTy Washington, who's obviously a pretty shifty guard, and TyTy cannot get any separation at all on Jabari. Jabari, just his length is just massive, yet despite that length, he can move laterally and actually has good hands too. He poked the ball out away from TyTy, and so that's the biggest thing I want to see is going up against, I'm sure, it's not going to be the same as Chet Holmgren and when everyone wants to poster him. But I think even if guys aren't trying to poster Jabari, certainly guards, and there's going to be plenty of talented ones, are going to be wanting to attack him on switches. And so I want to see how Jabari holds up on the perimeter. That's the big question. And even if he doesn't hold up perfectly, he's got the length that perhaps he can make a big difference that way too. So I just want to see that defense start translating and offensively just make open shots. Certainly shooting is a little bit fluky. You're not going to see, you're not going to be able to determine too much from Summer League. But I don't want to draw too many conclusions on his game as a creator, because we know that's sort of the thing that's going to come along last. So I just want to see him do the simple things: defend, play smart, hit the open shots, cut to the rim when it's there, just basically do the high IQ things, use the gifts that he's got. And then, of course, the creator stuff, it's going to come along later. So for me, it's just interesting. It's sort of the opposite of Jalen from a year ago. And that's fine, because I think that's also why they could be very good complementary pieces with one another.
Absolutely. It's a very interesting dichotomy there. And to your point about just, keep it simple, right? That's exactly what Jabari said in his media availability. He was just like, no, I'm just going to go out there. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to do the things that I know I'm going to do well, right? Talking about the advice that he's kind of received from some of the other, more veteran presences on this Houston Rockets roster, kind of getting ready to step into Summer League. On your point about the defense, man, in that package that AT&T Sportsnet released and kind of, a glimpse behind the scenes as to what the Rockets practice looked like, there was a point where you saw Jabari Smith, and he was just kind of like anchored defensively, like in the half court, kind of in preparation for somebody to drive. And he was like not even an inch away from being right there at the elbow. And then he was also like an inch away from the 3-point line, just occupying so much space defensively. And the idea of him clogging things up is going to be absurd on that end of the floor.
And by the way, on offense, the clip that it looks so simple, that and one that everyone posted, but at the same time, look, if you are 6'11" and have a wingspan much longer than that, and you can shoot 40% plus from three to the point where guys are going to close out on you, guess what? You're going to have open lanes to the basket. So it seems pretty simple, but at the same time, it's a reminder of just how gifted he is. Yeah, if you're that big and you can shoot that well, it doesn't take a lot for you to all of a sudden get a driving lane to the bucket. It's a layup. And how many times the last few years have Rockets fans, joked about Giannis not having skill? Well, at the same time, there is a skill when you're that big, to doing those things. We hate to admit it, but that just comes to the territory. It looks a lot easier than it actually is, because quite frankly, if it wasn't that easy, there'd be a lot more, or if it was that easy, there'd be a lot more guys doing it. So yeah, it seems simple, but just as, the NBA world has gotten used to it with Giannis the last few years, hopefully people have to get used to Jabari doing that a bit more the next few years in Houston.
Yeah, the offensive package kind of, you said you're most looking forward to the defense. I kind of, and you even highlighted the point saying that, it's going to be interesting, the difference between him and Jalen, not necessarily, him being tasked with, orchestrating, creating as much of the offense as Jalen was last Summer League. I'm curious to see just how much of the reins the Rockets allow Jabari to take. That was one of my kind of 5 questions or takeaways going into Summer League in a previous episode, kind of how much will they just give him the basketball and maybe let him isolate at the top, right? Because I do think that, you go back and you can even look at some of the on-off numbers from Auburn, right? His, when Walker Kessler was off the floor, Jabari was a lot more successful with, the 5-out spacing, with more space to operate. And the NBA inherently is different than the collegiate level, where you have a lot more space to operate. So expecting the Rockets to run kind of a 5-out system there with Usman Garuba as their, expected starting 5 for Summer League, I'm very curious to see how all of that spacing really benefits Jabari in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, certainly. It's not just the Walker Kessler factor that's part of it at the college level, but also the NBA, the fact that you have the longer 3-point line, there should be more spacing and room for him to operate. So I'm excited to see that. And, the reason I said I wouldn't expect too much too soon with the creativity is that you don't want to build bad habits. But at the same time, we know Summer League defenses are not exactly dialed in that often, especially, the second halves of these games, maybe the first half when everybody's going all out. So at the same time, maybe there is some opportunities that, you can let him test some things. I think in real games, you do want to be careful, because you ask a guy to do too much too soon. That's how you sort of can dampen their confidence and build some bad habits. But yeah, in the Summer League, especially if, it's a fairly loose environment and guys are having fun, yeah, why not let him try some things, and let's see if the spacing that's going to be there, no Kessler, but also just a bigger court in general in terms of guys spaced around an NBA 3-point line and what that does to the defenses. Yeah, let's see what can happen. It's a very low leverage environment. And the good thing is that, I talk a lot about his confidence, but at the same time, you could tell from the interviews today, he is a very level-headed kid. So I guess that's the silver lining to this, is that even though Jabari has things that he needs to work on, quite frankly, he does not strike me as the type of kid that's going to get, just demoralized by 1 or 2 bad games. He seems very process oriented. I think that's going to serve him well in his development.
Coming up, we're going to talk about the other 2 Rockets draftees, Tari Eason, TyTy Washington. We'll also get to the Summer League veterans, if you will, in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at Arcade 1 Up. NBA Jam is back with Arcade 1-Up. The leader in at-home retro arcade games is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they've made it bigger and better than ever with a Shaq Edition machine. And one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade1up.com for an estimated early September shipping date. They've even got more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many, many others starting at just $399. And check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition machine to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade1up.com/lockedon. You've got until July 8th to enter to win an NBA Jam Shaq Edition machine. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Ben, when it comes to the other two Rockets rookies that they're bringing into this, into this team, into the system, Tari Eason, TyTy Washington, a lot of hype surrounding both of these guys. Frankly, for me, this is where I guess we're gonna maybe we'll be on the same page on this one. But you mentioned the defense, right, with Jabari Smith in summer league. I am so excited to watch Tari Eason just wreak havoc on the defensive end of the floor in summer league, because we've had now Rafael Stone has referenced him as a defensive playmaker. Steven Silas has referenced him as a defensive playmaker. Guys who, essentially, make plays on the defensive end by creating steals, blocking shots, doing whatever, and then turning that defense into offense and getting him out in the open court to be able to score some easy buckets. That's one of my top things that I'm looking forward to with Tari.
So I'm excited to see it, but I'm actually going to go the other way on this. I want to see his jump shot, because that's the big question. As versatile as he is, being able to guard 1 through 5, when you look at his 2 seasons in college, he shot 24% that freshman year at Cincinnati, bumped it to 36% last year at LSU, but it was pretty low volume in the grand scheme. And ultimately, that's going to determine a lot of his viability. He's got to get that three-pointer to a respectable level. We've seen that at times the last couple of years with Jae'Sean Tate, where as good as he is in the defensive end, and still a useful player, don't get me wrong, there are limitations until you get that three-point shot well above 30%, and defenses don't feel that they can sag off you all the time. And so I want to see that the growth that he had, again, it was a small sample at LSU, does translate, because there is a ceiling to what you can do if you don't have that perimeter shot. It's so interesting. The past week, we've heard about these Eric Gordon, Philadelphia discussions that haven't really gotten off the ground, it doesn't seem like, between the Rockets and the 76ers with a trade. And of course, the reality is that the best asset that Daryl Morey has available realistically is Matisse Thybulle. Now, they do have the 2029 first, but I don't think the Sixers want to give up an unprotected pick that many years in advance. And I don't think the Rockets necessarily want to pick that many years in advance if it's, heavily protected. So Thybulle's the biggest realistic asset. But at the same time, even though he's a very good and versatile defender, there's a clear ceiling because you can't trust his three-point shot. And that's what a guy like Eason can become if that three-pointer doesn't translate. The good news is that his form seems good. He's really talked about revamping his mechanics. And so I think, that suggests that rather it being something random, that there is something that he's found. But yeah, now we see him take a couple steps back to the NBA three-point line. These are his first. Not that you're going to be able to tell from, 3, 4, 5 summer league games what's going to translate to the NBA. Again, some of these guys can shoot 60% in summer league and go down to 20 or vice versa. You don't want to read too much into it, but I do want to see the mechanics. Does it look good? Does he seem confident in his shot? Because long term, the defense, I'm excited to see it. Yeah, but at the same time, I'm almost to me, that's almost baked in. You look at his highlight clips, you look at the interviews, it's going to be fun, sure, that he's doing it in a Rockets jersey, but you expect it. I do want to see that jump shot, how that comes along, because as I mentioned with Jabari, the jump shot you don't really worry about. It's there. He is an elite shooter. You can tell not just in the numbers, but the form, the confidence, everything is perfect. With Eason, it's a work in progress, and so I'm excited to see, and maybe a little bit anxious too, but mostly excited to see how that jump shot looks in Las Vegas.
Let's go the other way now. TyTy Washington, who, again, just an absolute miracle that he was there at 29 when the Rockets were picking. Maybe, some injury woes, kind of had him slip a little bit further in the draft than he was, originally projected. I remember during the pre-draft process, this was a guy who was consistently being mocked somewhere in the late teens, early 20s. So for the Rockets to be able to pick him up at 29 was just a huge get for this organization. It does seem like he's going to be the one backing up Daishen Nix, which I feel like is maybe to be expected. I was a little curious what direction they would probably go ultimately with Daishen Nix and TyTy Washington both being on the roster. But kind of what are your expectations for him? What are you looking to see out of him specifically?
Yeah, well, I do want to see how each of them play with Josh Christopher and the starters. Well, certainly Jabari will start. We'll see if Tari does. I feel like as far as the starters, we feel pretty confident that Daishen, Josh Christopher, Jabari, and I'm guessing Usman are locks to start. Would you agree?
I had those as my locks, and I also actually had Tari as my lock.
Yeah,
The only one that I had up in the air was Daishen versus TyTy
Oh,
was
okay.
the last spot.
Well, I was going to say Tari is for me a probably. I think the odds are he will start, but it wouldn't floor me if one of those other guys got it and they tried to sort of not because they think that the other guy is a better prospect than Tari, but just because of trying to balance the units. Because with TyTy, it's less about like one area of the game. Sure, you want to see him make quality decisions, make open jump shots, make the right reads. But I do want to see the synergies that TyTy has versus Daishen Nix with each unit because I do think that's going to be a battle. Like what a lot of Rockets fans don't necessarily realize going into this year, this coming season is really the last true rebuilding season because the year after that, that's when the pick obligations to OKC come back into play. You have all that salary cap room, so you're going to sign or trade for some veterans, and you're really going to be trying to win. Now, does that mean a year from now you're going to be able to win at like a 50-plus win level? No, I'm not saying that. But you are going to be trying to win every game. And so that's a little bit different. This is the last truly low leverage season where it really doesn't matter. And in some ways, you could argue that they're better off losing because of 2023 draft positioning. But at the same time, because it's low leverage, I do think that they're going to give looks to both Daishen and TyTy this year. And not that, the one that doesn't get it this year will never get a shot again, but it's going to be harder when you're trying to win to make those kind of rotation changes on the fly. So yeah, I just want to start getting a read, Daishen versus TyTy, because I think that's going to be a big year for these two. And even though TyTy is a rookie, I think it's definitely a competition. I mentioned that TyTy is sort of a hedge for a lot of things, obviously Daishen, but also KPJ in the contract, some of the off-court concerns. Josh Christopher, they feel pretty good about, but you never know until he sticks. But I would say, yeah, just how does Daishen look relative to TyTy? That's going to be one of those that by the end of this coming season, I think you want to feel pretty good about one of those guys being a rotation player.
Absolutely. I kind of had it, pegged for a while now that this upcoming season, Daishen Nix would have been the guy somewhere in the Rockets guard rotation, getting, the kind of lowest of the totem pole, like 10, 12 minutes a night, maybe some garbage time here and there, that kind of thing, just to be a part of the rotation. And I do wonder if, depending on how Summer League goes, kind of this is the first audition, so to speak, for TyTy Washington. The Rockets kind of already know what they have with Daishen Nix, but they're incredibly high on his potential, right? If TyTy Washington outplays Daishen Nix in Summer League and then maybe also outplays him in training camp, then maybe you have a situation where it's like, oh, okay, TyTy is going to be the guy in the rotation, right? He is ready. And so there you go. I do think it's it was a great way to kind of hedge their bets a little bit, like you said, on both KPJ, on Daishen Nix, all of that. So I love the acquisition.
And that's why I mentioned the uncertainty with Tari. It's not because I think that somebody is better to Tari. I just think that there's probably going to be a very concerted effort to stagger those units so they can look at both Daishen and TyTy with different guys. And, I don't see any way that the two veterans, Josh and Garuba, assuming they're healthy, they're going to play. And Jabari is going to start because he's Jabari. So really, it's just those other two spots. And so it wouldn't shock me if you try and, see some experiments. Because even though Daishen is ahead in the pecking order at this particular time, I do think it's a season in which they do want to give TyTy some looks here or there so that hopefully by next summer they have a better idea which of the two of them is a legit backup point guard for a team that's trying to win.
Of those last two veteran names here that you just mentioned, right? Josh Christopher, Usman Garuba. I feel like Josh Christopher, we almost kind of know what Josh brings to the table. It'll still be fun to see him take another crack at Summer League and see what, what steps he's taken in his game, how much he's grown in the 3 months from the end of the regular season to now. But, that's super fun. We're going to fix that in segment 3. My camera just died. Love this production value for Locked on Rockets, but you can still hear me, so that's all that counts. So with that, shout out to our YouTube viewers. With that, are you more excited, or I guess, is there more of an onus on Usman Garuba to kind of show out a little bit this Summer League to really show that he's taken some strides, especially offensively in his game?
Definitely. I mean, I will say for Josh, I do think that Summer League will be, if not important, I think it'll be fun for him to see what he can do as really the engine. Because, of course, when it comes to regular play, he often has to be sort of a complementary piece and fit in around Jalen and KPJ or whoever the other lead creators are on the court, sometimes Eric Gordon as well. Whereas now it's truly going to be KPJ or it's going to be Josh, excuse me, no KPJ, no Jalen, no Eric that's running the show. So with that in mind, it is going to be fun to see what he can do as truly the lead guard, because as we mentioned earlier, it's not like Jabari, Tari, that either of those guys are someone you're really going to run your offense from a creating perspective through. So I do think, if nothing else, Josh will be interesting just from the perspective of what can he do when he's high usage and you're sort of running him as the primary creator for your offense. And then I think with Garuba, he said it after this past season, his exit interview, that this is going to be the most important summer of his life so far, because he did not get to play a lot this past season. And there are a lot of other options. It's a crowded front court. That's why we've heard reports that they're open to potentially trading KJ Martin, because the Rockets have so many guys in that front court already. And of course, we've talked about Jabari and Tari this entire podcast, and you've re-signed Jae'Sean Tate, and you just have so many options that are already there. Alperen Sengun into the starting center. It's not like the leash is going to be that long for Usman Garuba. There are other people waiting to fill those roles. I think you look at today's waiver claim activity, when Isaiah Roby was a quality player, and yet the Rockets did not claim him because, of course, they've got a pretty full roster already. Not sure in terms of the final 15 who you would boot for him, and Roby ended up getting claimed by the Spurs. But that tells you that the Rockets feel pretty good about where they're at in the front court. If a guy like that shot, I believe, like 51% overall, 44% from three, didn't get claimed, then the Rockets feel pretty good about the depth that they currently have up front. And it's all young, too. So, yeah, Garuba's got to show something. Not that the team is going to grade Summer League that heavily, but at the same time, there's, with Garuba, not much to grade, period. So, yeah, I agree. It's not just – and, well, I shouldn't say it's not just offense, but defensively, we saw down the stretch of the year what he can do. The plus-minus figures don't lie. But yeah, it's primarily offense. Let's put it that way. That's where you want to see, can he be a contributor on some level, even if he's not, a big-time scorer. We've heard the comparisons that Garuba has thrown out there himself to Draymond Green. Can we see him take on a greater role in terms of facilitating and passing, even if he's not really creating his own offense in the low post, or, that much of a vertical rim threat at the 5, which is where he's played to date in the NBA. And I don't know, maybe you see him at times at the 4 as well, although I kind of doubt that given the Summer League roster. I think he'll be probably at the 5. But yeah, it's a huge summer, to say the least. Garuba's got to stay out there, and you've got to see something from him to make you believe.
On the other side, production value will be restored, as well as we will get to some Summer League predictions for Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, and TyTy Washington. Also, we'll dabble in a little bit of the most recent reporting, trade rumors surrounding the Brooklyn Nets and as it relates to the Houston Rockets. We're going to get there in just one moment after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and more, including Major League Baseball, UFC, MMA, boxing, golf, you name it, they've got it over at BetOnline. It's your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, scores, and more. And speaking of more, you can take a look right now to see who the odds-on favorite is to win Rookie of the Year for next season in the NBA. Right now, Paolo Banchero and Chet Holmgren tied at plus 350 to win the NBA Rookie of the Year award. Jabari Smith Jr. dropping a little bit to third place at plus 450. Then you got Jaden Ivey at plus 650, and rounding out the top 5, Keegan Murray at plus 900. So for that and even more odds, head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here for your final segment at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Shout out to our YouTube viewers who saw the production value go completely ass over in like there. I don't have any other way to describe it. So
my apologies for getting tripped up a little bit too. Like when it was bouncing back and forth on my end between, first you went dark, then I went the whole screen, then you came back, but there was a J in the middle of it. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked in like my commentary too, because I was like, what the hell is going on here?
It's
but
okay.
We figured it out. And there's a very big non-YouTube audience too. So
yeah, absolutely. Right.
Shout out to them.
Shout out to our podcast listeners who are just like, what the hell is Ben and Jackson doing?
Like Ryan the Logger Line, the true audio crowd. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, absolutely. Well, have fun with all the Easter eggs. We're back on track right now. I apologize for giving the YouTube viewers whiplash, but let's talk a little. toss out a couple predictions here for the 3 Rockets draftees for Summer League numbers, and then we'll talk a little bit about the rumors as it relates to the Brooklyn Nets and the Rockets, maybe potentially being a team that should get involved in a potential KD trade package. But let's start with Jabari Smith Jr. I feel like the easy one we could go with is like points per game. Instead, I want to go with threes per game. How many threes per game do you think he is going to sink in Summer League, Ben?
Sink?
Like,
okay, that's interesting.
How many threes per game is he going to make throughout Summer League?
I'm going to say, trying to think. I'm going to say like 2.4, 2.5, because I think he's going to take probably in the range of 6. They're going to give him a green light. And I mean, that could be conservative, quite frankly. It's just tough to say with minutes. But I'm going to say, let's be conservative, say he takes 6 per game. 2 would be 33%, but we know he's a better shooter than that. So I'm going to say maybe 2.5 threes per game on average, takes about 6 or 7 per game.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to actually go with 3.5 makes per game because
it is Summer League. It's going to be open.
It's Summer League. He's going to have an ultimate green light, and I think he's going to be pulling probably anywhere from 7 to 10 triples a game, actually. That's kind of where I'm expecting his numbers to fall as far as the attempts go, and we know that he's an incredibly talented three-point shooter, so I'm going to call it right now 3.5 triples made per game.
I like it.
In Summer League. Let's talk a little, let's shift gears here to Tari Eason now, a guy that is going to be a monster defensively and hopefully a monster on the defensive glass, but just on the, on the glass in general. How many rebounds per game do you want to call for Tari Eason right now?
I'm going to say 8. I think, especially because Garuba, as we talked about before, he's not exactly a traditional 5, but that's who you're probably going to be starting there. It's not like he's a behemoth that's just around the bucket and going to just vacuum boards. So I think there's going to be a lot of long rebounds, a lot of tips, and Tari with his athleticism flying around, assuming he's healthy and plays a lot of minutes, then yeah, I think 8 is completely reasonable.
I'm going to go a little bit lower than that for 2 reasons. One, I'm going to call 6.9. I'm doing it for the meme.
Okay.
Nice. I'm also calling it because they are 40-minute games. So they are shorter than traditional NBA games.
Yeah.
And so even the, if they wind up playing, maybe Tari gets anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes a night. I feel like that's just under what you'd expect on like a per 36 number basis. So I'm going to go with 6.9 rebounds per game. That brings us to our last draftee here, TyTy Washington. Let's go assists per game with TyTy Washington. How many dimes do you think he's going to be able to rack up?
I'm going to go 4 because I think, they're going to stagger those minutes. And I don't know, 4 might be underselling because, one of the things we didn't talk about, but there is a little bit of combo in him. He's got decent height. So maybe you see some Daishen and TyTy minutes together. But otherwise, if you keep him in like the 20 to 25 minutes per game role, which is probably to be expected as a backup, then I think 4 is a pretty good number.
I like 4. I'm gonna maybe undersell him even a little bit further. I'm gonna go with 3.2 assists per game. I'm getting really specific with the decimals in here because we're gonna have to average these out, and we'll be able to circle back and take a look at the receipts and see who came closer. And we only did 3, so we'll have a de facto winner here because somebody's gonna get somebody's gonna be closest on these out of these 3. And
okay,
then,
well then technically, because I was being a little aggressive, technically give me 3.8 for TyTy.
Okay.
7.8. For Eason and Jabari 3s, I'm gonna stick at 2.5.
Okay, all right, there we go. So we've amended our numbers there. If you're watching on YouTube, drop some of your predictions in the comments. You're gonna get ultimate Locked on Rockets bragging rights if you get some of these numbers right. If you beat both the Podfather, of course, of Locked on Rockets, Ben, and if you beat me, if you beat our numbers, then we'll anoint you like Locked on Rockets host for a day or something. We'll come up with something. It'll be like principal for a day when you were like in elementary school. So we'll figure it out. But Ben, let's talk a little bit about the most recent rumors surrounding the Brooklyn Nets, the KD situation, all of that, because I think this whole situation is so interesting. And I think the Rockets, you and I feel like have been 2 of the loudest voices kind of proclaiming that the Rockets should be, actively seeking to maybe get involved, as a third team in this, Kevin Durant saga, because they're in the position of owning the future of the Brooklyn Nets draft capital. And this is a very unique position to be in. You and I spoke a couple times last year before the Jalen Green draft about the possibility of the Rockets getting re-involved with the Thunder and trying to maybe lift some of the protections on the picks that were owed to OKC. This is a souped up version of that though, with the Brooklyn Nets picks and the KD situation. On the surface, what is your idea for how the Rockets could kind of get back involved, and to what extent would you maybe want to see them be involved in a potential KD trade?
Yeah, I mean, I would hesitate to give literally everything unless it was, well, I mean, theoretically, the value for KD himself, if he was somehow open to going to Houston, which I don't think he is, the value, it's one of those things, I don't even know if that lines up. And yet at the same time, that 34-year-old KD, I'm not 100% sure that works perfectly for here either, but it's KD. So if somehow in a crazy, bizarre world that happened, you can't rule it out. More realistically, I would be open to giving up not all, but some, if you could get a player like a Mikal Bridges, like I know the fantasy for everyone is Scotty Barnes. We'll have to see if Toronto would actually make him available. But I do think like it's pretty reasonable because when everyone looks at the scenarios for Brooklyn, the problem with so many of these hypotheticals is that if you trade Kevin Durant for a package, like say what Denver did with Carmelo Anthony, like that's sort of the quintessential like best case, 4 quarters for a dollar trade when they sent Carmelo to the Knicks, and that's like a decade ago. And they did the best that they possibly could in that deal. And they still never came reasonably close to contending. The bottom line is when you trade a star in today's NBA, you're just not going to be able in that era to contend. And maybe it keeps them afloat and, maybe it punishes the Rockets, the team that currently owns those picks. By not making those picks really good. But at the same time, like, and I understand why, because there's no payoff to Brooklyn to being bad, but all you're doing is just deferring the inevitable rebuild cycle. If you had those picks, there'd be a pretty compelling case for Brooklyn to do exactly what Houston did in early 2021 when they shipped out James Harden and focused on maximizing their own draft capital in the short term, because that's the easiest way to rebuild historically in the NBA. It's just Brooklyn does not have that opportunity right now. So all of these scenarios where we talk about Durant for, an all-star, but clearly a lesser all-star type player than KD, and then picks from that team, which, you never want to say that a pick is locked in. You don't want to go full Bill Simmons in that regard. But at the same time, there is some uncertainty. Like if you trade, for example, Kevin Durant to Toronto or Phoenix and you're getting picks from those teams, well, right now those teams are really freaking good. And so it's a big question. Not saying it's a lock that they wouldn't be good, but it's a big question. Whereas the ideal scenario for Brooklyn would be, what if you could actually build through the draft, and by acquiring their own picks, they would have full control over whether those picks could actually be good. That's the key variable, is that if you could get those picks back, then Brooklyn would know, hey, here is our path to 100% getting potentially a good draft pick in these years. And you wouldn't have to sweat it out and say, well, if Phoenix is still good at this point, then we're going to get to pick in the 20s. And what comes of this? And again, as we talked about, sure, they can theoretically get, everybody throws out like the DeAndre Ayton sign and trade. Well, what does a DeAndre Ayton and Ben Simmons core really give you? Even if Simmons is
sadness.
Healthy.
That's what it gives you. It's sadness.
I mean, the best case scenario, even if Simmons stays on the floor, that's like a 45 type win team. It's nothing that's going to win you a championship. You're just in that purgatory. And, I mentioned the Denver Carmelo thing because that's like the rosiest trade you could ever get in terms of like role players that fit the system perfectly. Everything works out. And it still didn't come close to building a championship team, because that's how hard it is to build a contender. So Brooklyn has an appeal, if Houston was open to it, to trying to get those assets back. And as far as Houston, like, you do have to consider that this is the best time to do something with those picks. You will never have someone else as leveraged as Brooklyn is right now. And there's opportunities that come with that. Because if you pass this up, look, there is a chance that because Brooklyn knows that they're not going to have any draft capital through 2027 as it currently stands, then they can go all out to, try and win 45 games a year. Because what the hell difference does it make to them as far as being bad? If they're not going to get the draft capital, they may as well try to win and put a few more butts in seats and be relevant. We've already seen that as far as this year. They signed TJ Warren today, reportedly, which is a signing that, if that works out, could help them in the short term. You could do that for 5 more years and try and be at least relevant in the New York market. And there is a chance, if you do nothing, that Brooklyn doesn't bottom out. That, it's certainly not like the disaster that people proclaimed back in the day when people said that, oh, all these picks are going to be in the 20s, like Bill Simmons. No, that's over the top. But it could also be a world in which all your picks are sort of like the Tari Eason pick this year at number 17. And, that's decent, but it's certainly not great. So if you have an opportunity this year to put aside all that risk, cash in on the volatility, and get an asset that can really fit you, like Bridges, like Barnes, like some of these names that get tossed out all the time, you have to at least consider it. And I just think a lot of people undersell how difficult it is to line up the timetable perfect. The rebuttal is always wait until 2023 because of course that's the time that we've been talking about forever. The pick obligations come back into play for OKC. You've got all this cap space. You're going to be trying to win, and then of course this coming season, everybody wants to get one more high draft pick, and then you go forward. Well, that's in a perfect world. The world is not perfect. What if this is your best time? If this is your best time, if you can get a better player in 2022 with that cap space, and you would be giving up some financial flexibility, let's be clear. Like if you gave Mikal Bridges a new deal that would cut into some of your cap space in 2023, but if he's a lot better than who you think you could realistically get on the market in 2023, then you have to consider it. It's a complicated puzzle, and the idea that the timing is just going to work out perfectly, that the perfect addition is going to come at exactly the right time that lines up on paper, it's tough, and you may have to move the timetable up sometimes, and other times you may have to move it back. But you can't be so rigid that it's so hard to put a championship roster together that you have to be open to opportunities. And I think that's what this is. It's an opportunity. Not saying you do it for sure, but you at least owe it to yourself to have the conversations, to see what's out there. And really, the last point that I would make, the most compelling argument against it, and a few people have pointed it out, which is what happens to your 2023 draft pick. Because we all know this is the last year the Rockets control their own pick. And I forgot who it was, but a really good way of summing it up was that the 2023 Houston pick, the asset you get in next June's draft, is probably more important than any of the picks from Brooklyn. Well, I think that's true. But there's a couple of things. First off, if you believe that, then that should tell you that, hey, there's a lot of uncertainty with those future Brooklyn picks. And if you could cash in for an asset that you know is going to be a good player, then you should at least consider it. Secondly, in this scenario, you would be sending out almost certainly Eric Gordon to make the math work. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to bring in any sort of salary of significance because the Rockets don't really have that much tradable salary anymore. Now that John Wall is no longer here, Christian Wood is no longer here. So in these deals, the three-way with Bridges and Phoenix is the most popular. Eric Gordon has to go out. Well, here's the thing. I love Bridges. I think he's a great player.
On that point, they haven't officially waived anybody from the Christian Wood trade yet, right? Those guys could still be used as re-aggregatable salary. No?
You would have to wait until August 24th to combine them. That's the thing. So theoretically you could, but we're talking, weeks and weeks. You have to wait 2 months before you can do that. So, Gordon would almost certainly need to go out. And I think also Gordon would make sense for either team in this scenario, but certainly Phoenix, if you can get Gordon along with Kevin Durant, then that only further bolsters your odds. That's the perfect piece if you're bringing in KD to really make a championship push. So for that reason too, I think it makes sense to put Gordon in the trade besides just the salary component. And if that's the case, I call it the Gordon test. If Gordon is going out, how much does the person coming in raise your expected win total next season? And for me, I think Bridges is a really, really useful player. But honestly, I don't think his impact on winning in the short term is that dramatically different than Eric Gordon. Now, I do think he's more durable, and the biggest thing, of course, he's far younger. And
wait. We should call this the Herb Jones test then instead of the Eric Gordon test. If we're talking about impacting winning, come on, Ben, get with the program.
Fair enough. Okay, the Herb Jones test involving Eric Gordon in this case. But how much, if you bring in Bridges in this case from Phoenix, does that really impact next season's team? If you replace Eric Gordon with Bridges, I mean, he's a little better, but I don't think it's night and day to where you slot in Bridges with this really young roster and you say, man, this Rockets team is going to win 35 plus. They're going to be a play-in team. No, we're not talking about that kind of addition. And that's why I'm not saying cash in all the assets. I don't think it's going to be realistic for a player to come available that's worth all those assets anyway. And that's where I think you could get into sort of a discussion about, hey, is it worth it because it's going to materially change your 2023 draft outlook? At the same time, it's like the guys you can bring in, the impact relative to Gordon is not going to be enough that dramatically changes your 2023 draft outlook, especially in a world with flattened lottery odds. And of course, you may have the Brooklyn pick as well, by the way, to sort of bolster your odds even more because you have the swap right. So even if Brooklyn, isn't as bad as the Rockets next year, it may, increase your odds just a little bit to give you a bit of a hedge. But the bottom line is I just don't see Mikal Bridges having the type of immediate impact and maybe not even Scotty Barnes either, on your wins this next season for what happens to your 2023 pick to be all that significant of a, it shouldn't keep you up at night, that kind of thing. So that's why I would say be open to it. I'm not saying that Bridges or Scotty Barnes or anybody else is going to be available, but you owe it to yourself to at least have those conversations, because the appeal to Brooklyn is immense. When you look at the landscape out there, so many of these other offers that they get, the primary incentive to Brooklyn is going to be the draft picks, because even if you get an all-star player, the bottom line is the all-star player that's not as good as KD, and you put him with Ben Simmons, they're not going to win a title with that. I mean, you hope that maybe some of these guys stick around, but the bottom line is you're predominantly going to be betting on these draft assets that you get in a deal, some of those panning out, and there is inherent risk to any of those assets, because of course you're making that team, at least in the short term, really good by sending out Kevin Durant and or Kyrie Irving. In this case, this is the one exception to where they could feel confident that, hey, these draft assets could be really good because they're our own. We would control them. So there's a lot of appeal to that. And I'm not saying for sure it's got to line up. I don't think I'd do it for DeAndre Ayton. I saw Kelly Eco propose that in his article yesterday. I get where he's coming from. I personally wouldn't do it just because I don't think Ayton has the positional versatility. But for someone like Bridges or Barnes, I would at least consider it. I think it's one of those things. It's hard to have a strong take until you see what the offers are, but you owe it to yourself to have the conversations.
Yeah, I'd be hard pressed to imagine that these conversations aren't currently taking place or haven't already, had a few preliminary talks about what the initial framework for a deal of this caliber could potentially look like as the Houston Rockets are involved. Also, I'm just going to throw it out there, Ben. Tinfoil hat theory. This is why Eric Gordon hasn't been dealt yet, because they're waiting to see what's going to happen in the aftermath of the Kevin Durant trade, right? Because if the Rockets do try to get involved in some capacity, you're absolutely right. They need tradable salary to be able to bring back in a name or two from, potentially being the third team, wheeling and dealing for a potential KD trade. So maybe even though Daryl Morey is pushing all the right buttons and trying to get EG and the 2018-2019 Rockets reunion tour fully churning up in Philadelphia, maybe that's why there's a bit of a holdup there, because the Rockets are kind of waiting to see how this situation resolves itself before committing one way or another to dealing Eric Gordon to another team, so that they do have that salary to play around with. But of course, it's going to be a ton of fun to see how this whole situation ultimately plays out. We're going to keep you posted for all the news, rumors, analysis, all of that right here at Locked on Rockets. But Ben, do me a favor, let our listeners know where they can track you down at.
Yep, absolutely. Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Rockets Wire on Twitter, rocketswire.usatoday.com, and then search for the Logger Line at your podcast distributor of choice.
Yeah, wherever you get your podcast, wherever you listen to this podcast, you can go check out the Logger Line. Ben's been doing an incredible job interviewing a lot of big-name guests throughout the Rockets offseason. Don't want to miss a single episode of that. But Ben, always a pleasure to have you back on the program, man. Have a good one.
Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked on Rockets. As always, appreciate you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider hitting subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available, all platforms. You can also check us out on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets, like, comment, subscribe. Remember our motto: for the house, for the team, for the algorithm. Go drop the comments on YouTube. It helps out the show immensely. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.